November 10th, 2012. Brent writes Gail and informs her that the Gail android has been attacking the Jesuits, and they've been playing Gail's music in the hope that it would defeat the Gail android. The Jesuits, desperate to defeat the Gail android who's annihilating them, start adopting Church of Gail strategies against her. The music doesn't work, and the Gail android protrudes her nipple guns and blasts the Jesuit ship. The Jesuit ship splits in half and crumbles to its death. In desperation, the Jesuits go to Church of Gail, all waving white flags out their windows. Rule 13, the Jesuit military leader, hails Church of Gail, looking flustered and desperate. She explains that the android has been annihilating the Jesuits and that every strategy they've used against the android has failed. They ask that a key leader on their side will meet with Gail on Skype to discuss the matter. Gail states that she wants to know if Church of Gail music has power against the Gail android before she decides if she wants to meet with the key Jesuit leader for talks. Gail goes on a frenzy making music for Church of Gail, hoping this will work against the Gail android. Using the theory that the Gail android has her spirit, but an inferior version of it, and if we could flood Gail's music and presence at the Gail android, that Gail's signals would weaken and she couldn't operate. November 12th, 2012. Dear Gail, I'm not surprised that your brain-to-brain has been so shaky lately. Gail android has been destroying every Jesuit city she can find, and as we speak, there are countless new cockies blowing up and filling the atmosphere. The Jesuits can't help this since they are helpless to stop her, but I sure do hope they've learned their lesson about creating such noxious bombs. It's going to take forever to clear up the atmosphere from all of that radiation, and it's only getting worse. The men and I have been hard at work installing hundreds of speakers on the outside of the church building. We instructed the Jesuit ship to be prepared to help us and told them to camp out while we ran this experiment. They agreed, and we stayed in contact through our view screens. It took some thorough searching, but we were able to track down the Gail android and get her on our radar. We didn't wait for her to see us. We turned the volume all the way up and began blasting your music from every speaker. I felt every hair on my body vibrate from the deep bass. Hugh was laughing and pointing at Rule 13 as her hair flew up and her breasts began vibrating. She scowled at him. I insisted for everyone to stop squabbling for a moment and pay attention. All of a sudden, Gail was rapidly approaching our radar. "Brace yourselves, everyone," I shouted. I turned the music up louder. "Focus on the music. Feel the music." Like a missile, Gail began encroaching on our position. The men and I concentrated on putting our fears aside and began enjoying the beautiful music. Some of us sang along. As Gail drew closer and closer, the Jesuits began to join in as well. We were all singing, swaying, reveling in the beautiful sound. Moments later, I looked outside and saw that Gail had stopped outside of the church building, looking down on us. At first, she didn't seem to be doing anything, and I wondered what she was thinking. That's when I noticed the volume fading on our speakers. I went to go turn it back up, but the volume switch was already all the way to maximum. "It's Gail," Gerard declared. "She's absorbing our sound waves. How is this possible?" Gail's booming voice could be heard cackling outside. "Quick," I said. "Rule 13. Start blasting your speakers before our sound waves run dry. Gail said we need to try mixing them." Rule 13 shouted something in Japanese, and the whole Jesuit ship came to life with more of the music. The volume in the skies returned as the sound waves augmented our own. "Is it working?" shouted Matthew. We all looked towards the windows anxiously. Gail was sprawled out in the sky, as if she were floating in a pool. Her eyes glowed, and a devilish smile slid across her cold steel lips. We heard the sounds fading once more, and then the Jesuits hustling around throughout their own ship, swiftly trying to turn the volume back up. "It's no use," Rule 13 shouted, throwing every switch she could, trying to push the speakers. "She's sucking music like miso soup on sweaty hot flash night." I didn't know what she was saying, but I quickly got the idea. Within minutes, All of the music had faded from the sky. All that was left was the hum of our engines and Gail still floating high overhead. "Oh my goodness," Terry shouted. "What's going on? What's happening to her vagina?" Something glowed overhead. Gail's metallic vaginal lips were slowly parting, and deep inside, I could see a ball of light forming. "It's not," Matthew's voice trailed off. "It's a resonant queophometric weapon," Terry declared. "Take cover," Vladimir called. I could hear a sweep of frightened shouts all around me as everyone ducked and braced. It all happened before I had time to embrace the full magnitude of what was happening. The entire room was suddenly engulfed in a shrill amplification of powerful sound waves. It was so loud my ears instantly burst. Silence gripped my senses, and yet to my horror, violent chaos was still crumbling down around us. I watched as men I knew, literally vibrated so hard they blew apart like water balloons. The ceiling opened up, and we scrambled as metal debris began raining down all around us. We were being destroyed. This was the end. I looked up in time to see missiles firing from the Jesuit ship towards Gail, my deafness broken by a loud scream as she was hit. I was shocked. I knew that any ship that dared attack Gail was flirting with suicide. Gail became enraged. One more hit, and I knew our church was a goner. But as the Jesuits began to drop their onslaught of weapons on the android, she quickly lost interest in us and began flying after the Jesuit ship instead. The last thing I saw was Rule 13 standing in the cockpit, her arm raised in a Nazi salute toward us as the ship backed away and began luring Gail away from the church. The colors faded from my vision, and I don't remember much after that. Gerard told me I had passed out from blood loss. The next thing I knew, I was in the infirmary, but it didn't look as I remembered it. The whole church had been reduced to a skeleton of its former self, desecrated under heaps of rubble, smoke, and bodies. There were janitors outside my room, some mopping up rivers of blood, others following behind with a pressure washer to hose the brains off the walls. I was worried for the other men, and I quickly rose to find them. But Gerard planted his hand into my chest and pushed me back down on the bed. "I'm under strict orders not to move from here until my internal injuries heal. I have a shattered pelvis, 7 herniated discs, a severed small intestine, a twisted stomach, a hangnail, 2 burst appendixes, a dislocated kidney, and my gallbladder was punctured by one of my ribs. I'm in and out of consciousness from the medicine, but I have my laptop and my Bible with me, and I am thinking of you. They say that what doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. My spirits are high, and I am warmed by thoughts of you safe at home. Your husband, Brent Spiner." November 12, 2012. Gail invites the Jesuits to accept Christ and realizes that Gail is formidable. Gail begins to feel that only Jesus Christ himself can destroy Gail. I'm pronouncing her a little differently so you can differentiate between us. But Brent assures her that Jesus said they could do this themselves. Gail learns that Gail went after the Jesuit ship and that Rule 13, because she shot a missile at Gail, may have distracted the android and saved Church of Gail from total annihilation. Though the Jesuits suffered casualties when Gail went after them, Rule 13 escaped damage, though some others on her ship died from vibrations induced by the Gail android. Because of Gail's attack on the Jesuit fleet, one of the Jesuit ships exploded and damaged the Gail android's armor so that Gail had to retreat to make repairs. Zach Knight informed Gail on the 13th that it takes a while to fix damage to the armor. November 13th, 2012. Gail decides to meet with the Jesuits to deal with this very serious threat. Both sides agree that their differences don't matter anymore with such a serious threat that could result in the annihilation of the human race. The Gail android had taken out 90% of those who lived on Church of Gail, millions, on November 12th, and 90% of all Jesuits on Earth. While Gail is on Skype with Brenton Terrance, the Jesuit ship approaches Church of Gail. They want their important leader to meet with Gail while she's on Skype. Zach Knight boards Church of Gail and comes to where Brent and Terrance are so that he can talk to Gail on Skype. Gail and Zach Knight agree to have a cessation of hostilities so that they can work together to defeat the Gail android. Zach accuses Jesus of breaking his non-interference agreement with Zach Knight and Satan because he claims that Jesus had a hand in building the Gail android and that Jesus constructed Church of Gail, and so Zach is entitled to use Satan to rebuild the Jesuit fleet which the Gail android has demolished. The non-interference agreement happened after Zach Knight seduced Gail as the Antichrist in February 2012 by impersonating Jesus to her. It's basically an agreement for Jesus, Satan, and Zach Knight to all leave Gail alone and for none of them to deal with her directly. That was what the non-interference agreement was. And that is why Jesus will only talk to Gail through Brent on Skype and will not meet with her one-on-one in person like he has with Brent Spiner in 2012. Brent agrees with Zach that Jesus did have a hand in the construction of the sex dummies and Church of Gail. Gail tells Zach that he broke the agreement first because he's always talking to her brain to brain as Jesus. So if Jesus did break the non-interference agreement, Zach did it first. So Zach had already breached the non-interference agreement before Jesus constructed Church of Gail or the sex dummies. Gail was trying to stick up for Jesus. Gail and Zach move on from this discussion and get to the business at hand to defeat the Gail android. Gail agrees not to use conspiracy law to prosecute Jesuits in court. Jesuits agree not to attack her men with sexual crimes. She agrees not to consummate her relationship with any of her men. The agreement is signed, and from that day forward until conspiracy law was reinstated later, the Jesuits and Church of Gail worked together as a team to defeat the Gail android. Gail made a video to announce the treaty. Zach Knight published the treaty at Church of Gail Wiki, his website. Gail did not realize it, but Zach had sneaked into his own addendum to the treaty into the signature lines that both Gail and Zach signed. Zach embedded into the signature line below his signature this: by signing my name above this line, I hereby agree to continue to tempt, sexually arouse, and thrill Gail brain to get brain. I know full well that no means yes. Zach embedded into the signature line below Gail's signature this: I hereby declare that Zach Knight has the world's most impressive penis, and I invite him to give me brain-to-brain loving. Gail was not aware that that was embedded into the signature lines, or she would have requested that the treaty be redone, for sure. Gail gets a certificate in Microsoft Word. She next studies HTML and CSS and a bit of Microsoft Outlook. She begins very serious work overhauling her website because she feels it's a detriment in its present state to her job prospects. She strives to make it more professional. December 2nd, 2012. The Gail android changes her website, and it now has a Mayan symbol with gloomy music and announces the end on December 21st, 2012. Gail makes a video about this and lets the world know about Barack Obama's disaster preparedness website for people to visit to prepare for this. Gail asks the world to pray and fast and ask God for wisdom over how to deal with the Gail android. Gail plays around with JavaScript, HTML, and CSS to spruce up her website. Because of some new skills she has learned, she now applies not just for office jobs, but for jobs like assistant web or graphic designer, though she still needs to learn more HTML and CSS and other programs. Gail still feels like Jesuits, quote unquote, are bothering her when she goes outside and lets Brent know of this. Brent tells her these are not Jesuits, but King James only people who are mad at her because she is no longer King James only. Gail has revamped conspiracy law to arrest people as individuals and not as Jesuits when they violate her conspiracy law, and so she is able to reinstate her conspiracy law without violating her contract with Zach Knight or the Jesuit order, so that her harassers can be arrested and dealt with because they are arrested as individuals and not as Jesuits. December 5th, 2012. Gail hears a message in her brain. that says an android will be created